Welcome to the Chalk Talk Gym podcast, where we explore insights into healthcare that help uncover new opportunities for growth and success. I'm your host, Jim Jordan. Welcome to Chalk Talk Gym, where today's episode unveils the future of healthcare with our guest, Chris Jones, the innovative mind behind MatchRite Care. Now, Chris's journey goes from a personal loss to revolutionizing healthcare access. It's nothing short of inspiring. Through MatchRite Care, he's breaking down the barriers in medical record sharing, emphasizing the power of the patients by ensuring their medical history is accessible and shareable in real time. In this episode, we explore how MatchRite Care leverages technology to facilitate seamless healthcare experiences, highlighting the significance of predictive analytics, patient-centered care, and technology integration into enhancing the patient experience. So, Chris, tell me and the audience a little bit more about yourself.
A little backstory on why MatchRite was created. In 2008, I had a 5-year-old son diagnosed with a brain tumor. In that diagnosis, the doctors gave him 1 year to live. We would lose CJ in 11 months in that time frame. But within those 11 months, unfortunately for us, we missed a clinical trial because we didn't get his medical records in time. That happened in 2009. After losing CJ, I had the opportunity to go work for a healthcare company, and they were working in 3 or 4 different electronic medical record EHRs at the time. So it was Cerner, Epic, Meditech. For those of you who know what those EHRs are, we were working about 4 of them across the span of what the company did. So I got my chops tied into the electronic medical record space. And so the professional side of me was able to see the needs of doctors needing these medical records, at least unified in some sort, so they can provide the best value care for the patient, because patients had records in all those different EHRs and they needed those at one spot. And I saw the need from a provider standpoint, so where they're not getting the full information on the patient so they can provide the best value care. But then a parent in me and just a patient in me knew that in order for a solution to work, that the patient would have to be the center of that, just based off my personal experience, so to speak. So that's when we started MatchRite. And MatchRite is really focused on allowing the patient to be the center of that transaction for medical records from one provider to the other. And that's what we did. We unify all their health portals into one unified portal. We put in a language so the patient can understand. And then we allow that patient to share that information to a provider to where they can get the full view, combined view of that patient's record.
Your story explains a little bit of background, but I'll share it for the audience. So when you look at your LinkedIn, you started as a marketing director and then you did the IT side and you've moved yourself into combining both of them. And so it seems to me that besides having a personal reason to do, your marketing and tech background allowed you to see the fundamental difference in how your business model is compared to the rest of the world, because I've just switched healthcare providers and in health systems. And so I had my annual physical yesterday and I brought information that they didn't have, even though the electronic health record was supposed to be sent along.
Common problem right across the board. But the background is really important and I'm glad you mentioned that, is that I did have a marketing background. I had a marketing company back in 2006. What's unique about what we're doing as far as MatchRite is that even though we're a technical company, so technically we built this product or this software that allows electronic medical records to move from government sector, VA patients. It doesn't matter to us that we're plugged into all of that technically. But what I tell a lot of as we get out more and more in the field into the market, what I explain what MatchRite truly is 50% technology and it's 50% patient engagement. We really are a bilateral company, right? That work parallel with each other. As we're building this great technology, it's just as important that we communicate with the patient, let them know what their rights are and their roles are. Because if you think about banking, for instance, is that you can plug your banking records into Chime. There's you name it. There's so many different ways you can plug your banking records into so many different apps. But you don't really see that for healthcare. If you think about that, and there's a lot of concerns about, I should not move my records here. I got to have it, make sure it's secure. But security programs that banking have, those are the same security protocols that patients have. They just need to be educated on that, right? That there are mechanisms or tools that you can move your records to help combine and give you a good opportunity to be able to communicate your health back and forth. And that's what we're on that phase to do that too, from a marketing standpoint. It's not just communicate what our app is, but also communicate on what their rights are, the patient's rights are, what their needs are, how to use these tools. So we've taken that on as well. So our goal is not just communicate about what MatchRite is, but also what your rights are in healthcare. That's just as important.
It struck me that I'm now manually entering all the stuff into the health record of my new doctor, when in fact, I just finished doing that 5 years ago before my company changed health plans, and I'm doing it again. And it strikes me that there's no return on investment from the patient unless you take this approach.
Yeah. And we've learned that we started this maybe 6 years ago is when we actually started the technical phase of this, right? Understanding that in order for a solution to really be transferable between the patient and provider a lot easier, the patient would have to be the center of that solution. Now, I would tell you 6 years ago, up until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, it was not popular to have the patient have that much control because the provider wants to build it for another provider, or the health system wants to build it for the providers that work for them. And the solution is always built, and then that solution is passed on to the patient. And the patients have to adopt something they have no process in building or even communicating that. And that's why you see a lot of these solutions that's being rolled out not really working or being convenient for the patient. And the provider can't get a lot of adoption on this solution, this great solution that they built, because they built it without having the patient necessarily in mind or even giving the patient access that they need. We figured that we built the solution. If it works for adoption, patient adoption was the most important thing for us, because the patient adopts it, then that helps providers now know they have a sea of patients they can connect to. So our first role was like, can we build an application that patients can adopt, no matter if they're a veteran in Arizona, their parent that's dealing with a kid like me that's dealing with a brain tumor here in Kansas City. The same application should work for both of those entities. And that's where you get adoption for, is that we want to have a uniform application that just longitudinally connects to all the patients, anybody that has records in hospitals, regardless of what software they're using. And that's where we started our game plan for, is really make those connections work from a patient level. But then it has to be powerful enough to have enough information to where even providers that they're sharing this information with doesn't have, right? They will only have information within their platform, within their software, but they can't get it from the software across the street that uses a different, the provider from across the street that uses a different platform. Our goal was to say that we'll send the patients out to do the hard work. You just connect with us and ask the patient to share it with you. And that's where the roadmap of the marketing kind of ties together. So you're marketing both places, but that's where our targets are.
So how does the provider get it into their Epic or Cerner or whatever system is of their choice? How does that information get in there?
Yeah, the first step for us is really to get it to the patient and allow them, they're the first point of access. So the way our platform works is it allows the patient now to share it to another side of our platform. That's our provider side of our platform. And that information is fed over to the provider. They have that signed. They have a SaaS model there that they connect with. The next phase of MatchRite is to sit MatchRite inside of those EHRs, allow the doctors to decide, what information do I need to put into my platform? Because we have to be really careful and not just letting the patient feed all the information to the provider, because it can get really mad into their platforms. So we want to allow the doctor to search through those patient records and then decide, all right, this information needs to be added to the EHR. This doesn't. We're in the second phase of that now, is that we have the platform to get it to the provider. The next phase we are now is building that platform inside of their EHRs as a smart application to where they can decide, I want this information from MatchRite that the patient shared to me inside of my EHR. It keeps it clean.
Keeps it clean. Because I think that one of the things that we're struggling with from a policy perspective is interoperability and cybersecurity. And so if you're a CIO inside of a hospital system, it scares you that every unique connection is a risk. And
Yep.
if I have all my information coming in through your hub and I'm familiar with your security procedures, that solves a lot of problems for me.
Yeah, and I think so. And the way MatchRite works uniquely is that because the government's regulation is really pushing the patients, they have rights to all of their records, right?
Mhm.
It's theirs. They should be able to access those records. What we did with the Match is there's two parts of MatchRite. There's edit information you can edit. There's the other information you can't edit that stays true to source, right?
Mhm.
So the information that comes out of the EHRs or the hospitals, for the hospitals, that's the information that's not edited. That can't be edited. It's directly coming from those EHRs.
Mhm.
And we take those hospitals, those EHRs that send information to the hospitals, we combine it in one view. So there might be 5 separate hospitals on 4 different EHRs. So the patient doesn't recognize the tech behind what it's doing, but the patient see it all in one spot. And it allows that patient now to share that information with the provider. And when that information is shared with the provider, they're going to look at it and say, hey, you gave me a lot of information. I might not need all of this. Let me pick the information that I need for this particular transaction and they can decide what information they need to feed over to their EHR. And that's the barrier, right? That gets past a lot of these security regulations, because from the standpoint of when when a patient, if you get any information off a patient, that's usually the patient has to sign off if that's correct or not. They're the one person that knows it. When that patient sends that over, if you think about HIPAA is sharing other people's information, is where the teeth of HIPAA is.
Mhm.
Uniquely is where MatchRite stands. It's the patient sharing their information, right? So it reduces some of those regulations issues right out the gate, because we're not sharing other people's information. It's really the patient sharing their information directly with the provider. And the provider can trust that when he puts that information in, it came directly from the electronic medical records, and then a patient signed off on it. I want this to go to this provider.
How many other companies are doing what you're doing, taking that outside in approach?
I think there's a lot of companies that's trying to, right? I think we're uniquely in a position to where we're strictly outside the bureaucratic process of this, right? We look at a lot of other companies that's doing it, and it's more focused on the facility to facility exchange and then to the patient. We truly go straight to the patient first, from the patient to the facility. So there's a few organizations out there attempting this, but we don't plug into any of the HIEs, any of those other entities. We are truly, when a patient sends the information over, it's truly information that's coming from them, straight from their hospital records.
So I noticed part of your background had a hospice and home care component to it. How does your system help or enable that? Because that's usually a part of the value chain that's not as connected. Used to be the Oasis form. I'm probably aging myself when I say that, but how do you enable in some of that aspects of it?
So that really ties to the continuum of care, is where that is, right? You get treated, you go to the continuum of care, whether it's hospice, home health, whatever. And that's at the impetus of where my background started. So my IT background really in healthcare, so to speak. I did a lot of networking before I got into hospice space. My first introduction into it was this continuum of care model. So those are patients that's leaving that has to get treated at home. And usually at home, it's not just caregivers there, there's parents, loved ones. We dealt with all of that. So a lot of my IT background in building software and connect software in the company I was at was really focused on helping those home care, have a patient get records at home. So when they do need to get treated in a hospital somewhere, they would have the information they need to get to the hospital. So that's where MatchRite made the most sense for me building this way, because we're seeing at the core source. Yes, there are hospitals that patients are going to see providers at hospitals, but most of the time, this information needed at home, the patient that's being seen at home is going to need this information, because when they go to those hospitals, they need to have all the information as possible to be able to get treated. So our goal was, and that's what made us decide that when we built Match, it has to be in a patient hand. And you can only imagine how it ties to my story. I was seeing myself, I was seeing my son there, is that there's all these other solutions being built at a facility levels, telling the patients, we're going to bring you this solution, right? And when we bring you the solution, it's going to have all your records in there. And every time they come back to the patient with the solution, it's missing and has a lot of gaps, right? And the patient was not even at the center of that solution. So we built Match, right? We thought it was very important that the patient was getting those records directly to them, right? Because of my relationship with hospice and home health. That's the reason why MatchRite is made the way it's made. It's because of my experience there. And I realized that the providers can get a lot more information a lot faster when you move the bureaucratic process out the middle and put it in the patient's hands.
Yeah. It's funny because I've been involved in the healthcare and on the electronic health record side. And there was some data that several years old now, but it probably still applies, is that children's electronic health records tend to be more accurate because mom and dad will make sure that they go through the effort to take something off it. Whereas if we're doing our personal records and maybe for our parents, we're inclined, if it's a lot of phone calls to get it fixed, we don't bother doing it.
Yes. And that goes into another subset of what MatchRite does, is that as we're building MatchRite out, we recognize that it's one thing to have your records, but dependents were so important because of the home health phase. MatchRite, when you create your profile on Match, you can also create dependent profiles. So if you're a caregiver to a loved one, you create their profile and pull their records directly in the profile and be able to share that independently. Because I understood from the hospice space that we're in, the home health space, is that caregivers, it takes you back to my experience in the healthcare space, is that the caregivers are going to be the ones, the parents that could be taking care of mom and dad, my sister, care of brother, all of that exists, right? They still have record. And those are the most center point, I think, of where the needs are, right? Is they're the ones that's really going to the doctor quite often. They're dealing with issues, acute issues at times, right? So that's what I've learned when we were building Match, right? We realized the importance of it. It's not just to have the records, but what more utility can we put to it. Most of the times, baby boomers might not be as tech savvy as their kids, right? How can a kid say, Mama, I have this? Our son or daughter, to your point, like I got my son's records in one spot. So my wife has, as I mentioned, my son is autistic. So my wife pulls agent information and all this therapist information, his profile. My 16-year-old has this profile. My daughter's in college now, but with MatchRite, we got MatchRite established after she went to college. But imagine if we had all her records in one spot and MatchRite at the time, and when she went to college, we can just transfer that over. Those don't get lost at that time. So there's so much utility in MatchRite.
Oh my. You also are a startup company. So maybe switch topics for a minute. So for our audience, because mostly we don't do a lot of startup companies, your challenge is executing that customer-centric vision with balancing an investor story to raise capital. So share how that experience has been. Is this the first time you've had to do that with your other careers? Have you raised capital before?
At this level, yes.
Yeah.
It's uniqueness that we're asking this. We've been self-funded this far. So I have really some solid doctor groups, provider investment groups that started with me 6 years ago, and they're carrying me this far too. We're in a place to where it's funny is that we started, I'll just be really candid. I think we started in the investor route, going to VC routes. And what we've learned in that space is that sometimes when you're building innovation, it's not easy to explain the roadmap to where in a way that they expect it. And then if you do go, this is for all you starters out there that's starting at 100%. So we have a lot of good traction that we're doing. We're actually talking to international spaces now with the government, with the VA and things that we're doing now. I'm just giving you some context of where we are now. But none of that would have happened if we had followed the rim of where the VC world was telling us, build this revenue model to get us closer to the money. Sometimes it's tough when you're building innovation in true tech for real. You have to follow not necessarily where the money is, but go to the value. And that value would generate that income in that space. And the value for us was to make sure when we build this application, it had a longitudinal connection to all these entities that we're trying to connect to. And I've learned a lot on the fundraising side because for us, giving away your company equity in that space, we're in this right now, like right now. But the conversations with investors are a little different now than when it started 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago.
Now you have
Yes, we know what we're building. We have the connections that we know we're connected with. And I think it's starting to shine a light on that. So we're circling back around to some of those investors, but our conversation is a lot different now because we stayed true to where our path was going. Our team is super excited about where we're headed and what we're doing, relationships that we're building too. And it's not for everybody. For us, it just worked that way. For us, the fundraising was really tough. I call it Kansas City. I call it the Kansas City circuit. I went through the circuit, the gauntlet earlier. I was told I was boiling the ocean. It was so many different things was said in that space. And I fought at the beginning of this. I fought so hard to try to push towards what the investors were looking for, what they needed, and made sure that my product aligned in that space too. And I learned in a couple of those things that I was getting away from what MatchRite should be. Because if you're building something, you're innovating, there is no roadmap necessary. There is no really mechanism to tell you how exactly it should work. You can only have guideposts of what happened before. And if you're truly innovative and you really want to build a product that you think can grow, you can listen to a lot of that stuff as guideposts, but it can't be the deciding factor on how you operate your business. Because I think sometimes you may get some growth, but then it could allow you to fail. And what we're building right now, we're touching the government, we're touching international, we're touching healthcare, right? It was just so unique in what we're building. And our goal was to be on the outside of the bureaucratic process for us to be successful, not necessarily inside. A lot of times the feedback we had was like, you've got to figure out how you fit inside of this. A really good example, and I would say this, we were presenting at one point and somebody said, how do you MatchRite fit inside a Cerner's model? And this was like 3 years ago. And my response was quick as don't. We don't fit inside that model. We support them, but we don't fit inside the model. What we're trying to build would be on the outside that we're building as a unique product too. And I think it served us well as the connections that we made now, the things that we're doing. I think the fundraiser is going to always be tough. There's no answer, right or wrong answer to it. But you have to recognize if your investors, they're going to be partners for a long while. And take it from me, my doctor investors I initially have are following me to each round. When I got to the point to where I need funding, I can always tap into that. So just think about when you tap into these investors, are these partners that can ride with you a long way, or are they just looking for the shortcut too? But then you got to decide, okay, when does it get in and out? Because there's a lot of good information these investors will have, but you really have to understand what you're trying to build when you engage with these investors. And I think we've done a decent job of that. We didn't get it all right, but we've done a decent job at least to facilitate our way through this.
So I think for our audience, one of the challenges of raising money is that you're getting it from angels and venture capitalists, more venture capitalists, they have a fund. And a fund generally says, this is my charter. I'm going to, and it always is not optimal, but in the best of, they'll pick their companies in the first 5 years and invest in them. And then in the next 5 years, they're hoping to deploy more money. They call it dry powder. And then they're hoping to get a return by the end of that 10 years.
Yep.
And they have specific models. And so they may come in and try to get you to convert your model to what works for their fund model. And it's a really tough balance. Now, healthcare IT is one, when you're doing a drug and you have to raise 100 million, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
But in healthcare IT, a lot of times you can at least get to some organic growth where you can take off some risks that other people see, to your point, and prove your way. But it takes a lot of courage to do that. So I commend you to doing that.
It takes a lot, right? So for me, I lost a son and we built it in that space. And sometimes a story can overtake the tech and overtake the business model. So I think the most important thing is to get the right team around you to balance that out. So you want to stay true to what you're building to, but you don't want to get so far outside of balance to where it's not investable at all. So what I did was put the right team around me. So the first thing I did, looking at that, I found my CEO was somebody that was in the private equity world, not necessarily in the health space, but somebody in the private equity world. That was the first step I made. The second step I made, I was like, I need to have somebody that's been in the government space, bring those guys on. Those are what I searched out. What I did was search out a team to really help give me a stamp approval to help me decide what direction we should go. The good thing about Match that we had out the gate is I knew I was on to something, right? I knew that part of it. I knew that early, right? But in order for it to be successful, we have to stand the test of time against just connecting with patients, making patients the focal point while everybody was building in HIEs and stuff. So the biggest thing for I would say is not to make those decisions alone, put the right people around you to help make those decisions. And then when you're talking with investor groups, whatever, there's so much good information, but with investors, because they've been through so much, they've seen so much, even to your point in building out a fund, there's a structure within that fund that they have to follow. It's good to understand what that structure is, because when you want to pull that cord and tap into that structure, you understand when the timing of it, because a lot of it is not about if or when. There's probably be some time that we do it, but the timing of it is important. I think for us is we sit as a team and really sit back. All right, we get this company on, then we'll be at this juncture, and then we can maybe pull this cord that we talked before. And it's just for us to really understand what we have, what our roadmap is. And then now that we know the playbook, so to speak, of some of these investors, some of them may not be for us. So it's okay, because I know sometimes you need capital, you have to have it. I was lucky to be able to be funded by a great group of doctors to help grow this that believes it. Not everybody has that. So my story may not sit for everybody, but that's just how we did it. So we do look at some of these VCs, some of these investors, and we're weighing them too. You have a right to weigh them too. You're building something great. You're talking to these organizations outside of Kansas City, outside of these places. You know what the probability of MatchRite being successful is, and you got to hold true to that. And you have to meet them halfway, right?
I was curious how you balance that as a human, because you obviously have this passion for it for personal reasons. But I looked on PitchBook. It looks like you turned down some money early on, and I won't go into the details so anyone is specific, but you had the courage to say, this money doesn't match my model, but yet you're telling me that you've got a lot of people that challenge your model and you listen to them. So how do you sort through that personally? It's a tough, lonely thing to be CEO of a startup.
It is. It still is. I think I will say that let my tragedy be your triumph. Like I had to go through super tragedy. It changes the way life, right? When something tragic, just what happened. And my prayers go out to the people in Kansas City that think that happened in the Chiefs Parade.
Mm-hmm.
That one moment changed lives, right? It changed the way your perspective. And my son did that for me. It changed, it helped you realize what's important in that case. So a lot of times when you're making these decisions, I literally go back to what would have been best for us at that time. And I'm making a lot of my decisions there. And when I make my decisions on what I think is best at that time, I lean on the team that that has the inside scoop on how people and stuff thinks, right? Because I think Steve is super amazing, right? Especially on the investment side of things, that he's been in that world for a while. He's young.
So he sees both sides. Yeah.
That's why when I talked with him 3 years ago, I was like, I'm going to need this in here to help us understand it. And that's where those decisions are made. I have the passion to go one way or the other, but he can say, all right, this strategically makes sense, right? And that's the important. So get the right people around you, right? And it may be unorthodox, right? having a PE guy run our operation makes all the sense in the world to us because we do know the help. We know we're a tech space, but he can help guide us and say, all right, this is a good decision. This isn't. But it's been helpful in that way. And everybody on our team has a specific role. And what I like to say is that I know my gaps. I understand what my gaps are. That's first. And you always find people to fill the gaps. You don't have people on exacerbate where your strengths are. You find people to fill those gaps. And that's what I did.
So when you look at startups in general, the goal is that you give liquidity to your investors at some point in time by an exit, a merger, going public. What's your exit strategy?
It's fluid. I'll say that much, James. It's fluid. I think what we've seen, because there's a lot of opportunity for us now. There's a lot of opportunity for not only our investors, even our team, right? I call my team that I bring on their owners too, right? It's not just me, right? I really consider that, right? That they're owners to help grow this thing and build this thing out. But it's fluid. There's some high level conversation we're starting to have now because they're really moving into our enterprise space. And I told our team, I'll just give you this bit. I said, there'll be a lot more conversations probably this summer when we really hit the market on the enterprise level on where our direction is. But for me to say one way or the other now, I think we don't want to put ourselves necessarily in a box. We just want to be the best match we could be or the best support tool that we can be, what we set out to do. And then let the chips, as my dad would say, let the chips fall where they may.
I think that you're also aligning with the trend. We've talked about the concept of a real-time healthcare system for years, but it was only when COVID happened that we recognized the big disconnect between information we have in public health on trends and things that are coming and the ability of our hospital systems to recognize that it's coming. And it always strikes me like yesterday, I brought my printouts from I think it begins with a Q, cardio. It's like cardio with the Q. Yeah. So I brought my blood pressure and my weight from, I don't know, years, outputted to her, right? She didn't have that information. And if you're someone who gets the white coat disease when go in to get your blood pressure, and they're like, oh, we want to put you on some meds. Listen, it's been at 120 for 5 years. I just hit 140 when I come in here because I'm nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah. But those things are really valuable because it's either you can say that to your doctor and they don't know if that's a truth or a fallacy. And so I think there's just so much more information that can be had. And I think we haven't recognized that is not something that healthcare systems are, one, good at, and two, really are going to spend a lot of energy and funding to go get it.
And it's weird because if you think about, I was at the HIMSS meeting they had here just last week. The focus was on funding going to dense areas, right? And then rural areas, was underserved areas, because they're both sides of there's urban and there's rural. They're both underserved, right? And how we look at it. What I look at it from that standpoint is that we should be universal enough to where no matter where you are or where you're connected to, it should look the same, right? As far as the solution. And that's what MatchRite solves it to do. That's the foundational point. We have quite a few startups or groups that has reached out to us to partner with us on a couple of things, right? Only because we look at ourselves as a foundational piece. We're the piece that gets the basic information and we can build off top of that. Most people build AI solutions. I'll use this for example. It's the way there's a lot of AI solutions coming out now. They're excited about the AI tools that exist. But only for AI to really work and be effective, what do they need? Right? Just think about that. So this big boom of AI stuff, our team is saying that, where are you going to get the information from? They're pulling information from the same incomplete information that's always existed and building an AI around that. Then you think about how great or how supportive that AI solution would be without the right information. Now, can we provide a better subset of information from the patient directly from across all these bounds to help provide better data to put AI tools on top of? Those are the thought processes that we had, right? To extend beyond what the now is. Let's start with some good information, really give a really robust, good AI tool that can provide good output, right? Bad input in is bad input out, right? And that's how we see it. We really do see is that from the patient engagement side and engaging the patients, is we'll have a true organic subset of a lot of information across a lot of different barriers without all the headaches of which in the bureaucratic process of healthcare that you see outside of there. We made it a point to stay outside of that space. It wasn't popular. Most people probably looked at us at the beginning and said, who are these guys? We're going to keep building our stuff, our $1 million tool. And we're on the outside. Like, keep doing what you're doing. We're going to focus on the patient. And we're starting to get traction there now. I think we're excited about where it can go. We do think we could be the standard of how patient information is shared. And we're not just using that just as a term out there. We do believe that could be possible now. And our goal is to get patients on and get them connected and just meet them where they're at. We don't need a special tool. The same tool that connects a veteran can connect you, mom, or you, son, that's dealing with your parents' information, healthcare crisis. So we're excited about where MatchRite is. We're excited about where we're headed. And this healthcare space is unique. We've been in it a while. We don't talk about it, but it's not, we use the one startup for sure, but we've been at this about 6 years. So we know a little something.
A little something. Yeah. How do you keep abreast of all the rapid changes that are going on? Particularly, you mentioned the word AI, but there's lots of moving parts in healthcare. There's lots of policies and regulations that are changing constantly. Where do you go to keep up to date on this stuff? You mentioned HIMSS for one, right?
Yeah, HIMSS for one. But you know what? So what's weird though, James, is that the healthcare IT world is small. So we deal in all EHRs, right? So there's a lot of newsletters we're part of, email lists we're part of that come out. Our goal is really to see what the nuances is in every EHR and where those regulations stand. So there's a lot of different ways we can get it. We're connected, I'll say that much. And we also attend as many of these conferences that we can or get information on the backside of that. A little story. We sat at DC Health Systems, I think in 2021 in their office or 2020, right when COVID was hitting, to talk about MatchRite and what we were doing there. That's 4 years ago almost, right? So we sat in the office talking about MatchRite in that space, really understanding where the roles were. Even if you think about, I don't know, I want to get into, but C2F11, those things that were substance abuse information can't be passed between different entities, whatever. And we were looking at that time, we're not passing between entities, we're giving it to the patient. So we can move information, clinical notes a lot easier than the larger entities can. There was things that we were thinking through even back then that we're building on top of.
That's a really intriguing thing. So the patient themselves is giving the permission when it passes up to the Epics and the other care providers.
And it goes back to the initial conversation when we started this, is that in order for a solution to truly work and be a solution, the patient has to be at the center, regardless of what you're thinking about, whatever other organizations are thinking about. You got to have to include the patient. If you're building solutions and then saying, hey, I'm going to pass this information out to the patient, there's probably some gaps there, because there's even gaps going through the patient that we're seeing too, right? I can only imagine, and we're getting their permission. They're telling us, they're connected us. They're telling us what hospital to use. They're telling us what records there. They could put notes on the records they pulled through, they can put notes on there and say, hey, I don't use these medications anymore. It's true patient engagement, understanding of their health records with the MatchRite. But even in there may be some gaps. So I can only imagine that when a patient isn't communicated with and they're moving records between two facilities without the patient considered, there's going to be some gaps there for sure.
Even I was surprised when you think of if you have a daily vitamin regime or herbs or something that you're taking, the doctors consider that drugs and they want to know that, right?
Yeah.
So that they can see if there's any interaction. It's shocking how much information they do not have, or their information is old to a point of a drug that's never being used anymore. But I also think there's some interesting there's two ends of the lifestyle that's interesting to me that this could be very valuable on. So the first component is kids getting out of college and moving on, right? So as you point out, and one of my daughters has been very successful and moved several times. And one of the things that happens is I'm healthy, I'm young, I'm not going to go see a doctor. And I always say, you got to get plugged into primary care as soon as possible, because if you do have an issue, that's your access point. And then I was talking to a neighbor yesterday. We're walking dogs together and she's over 65 and she picked a certain health plan because her and her husband plan on traveling to a number of different places and wanted a health plan. But we were talking about, but how does she get her records to doctors? That this year she's going to Florida, next year she's going to Texas for 2 months. I could see the value of that. So what's the biggest lesson that you've learned so far in your journey?
I don't think I learned it yet, right? I don't think, I don't know. I probably have learned it. I don't know which one's the biggest. When everything's a priority, nothing's a priority type, we use that inside our group now. So I think, but I will just highlight certain things that I have learned too, is that in this journey so far, I think especially there's one thing to build a tech and have the tech in space and build that out. We started building our tech in the basement. I'll say that I always, because we built this in the basement. What was really important for us to do is really test drive it and market, and don't jump on the first yes, right? Because I think you could limit that technology too, right? Really understand where you want your roadmap, where you want your product to go. And then it helps you identify that, is this something I should jump on now? Or this opportunity is a roadmap feature that we can add later, right? to keep the integrity of your product. I think a lot of times, and I'm grateful that I had great people around me too, is that there were some huge opportunities that came out a few years back that we could have jumped on, I think, but it would just so limit what we're building now. It would so limit the things that we're doing now. And for me, my story and my son and what I was driving was a driving force, not the focus, the really focus at the light at the end of the tunnel. And not everybody has that drive and has that purpose behind it, so to speak, that why. But I look back at this and me and my team had a conversation about this just the last couple of months on what opportunities if we had to jump on would have looked lucrative, right, at that time, but it would have been a huge road blocker now. So just really know what you want your product to be and understand that and recognize what's a shiny object and what's actually an opportunity. And those are hard to identify sometimes, especially when you're in a new space. The best thing I could tell you is that will this take away from my ultimate goal? And then remember, for me, my ultimate goal wasn't just built on my guts and feelings and all this stuff. We brought in a PE person to tell us like, all right, for it to hit revenue, you need to have these 2 targets doing these things. So we knew what our goal was. As these shiny objects popped up, we're like, all right, this is going to take us away from our long-term goal. Let's keep moving. It's a unique perspective on it. I'm just super grateful for the people I had around me, and I'm grateful for where we're headed now. The job's not done, and Pastor Mahomes' words, it's not done. There's a lot of work ahead, but that's where I think the biggest lesson for me is that follow true to what you're building, right? Know what you need to get to, your end goal in mind. And every time a shiny object or opportunity appears, you have to identify, is this going to slow down my ultimate goal or will it help in that moment?
So I was working with a client last week and I had a ton of data. And at the end of it, I broke out the various options into those that were root cause and those were symptoms of the healthcare system, right? So a lot of times, to your comment here, is that the shiny object is solving a short-term symptom. But I also hear out of you something that I think is important just to bring up to the people. So first, it's you made your system and then try to break it, right? So you're the person that tries to break it. In that effort of breaking it, you discover if your sample of one was good or not. I hear having a vision, which is obviously very personally motivated to turn down money because you don't want to focus on a symptom. And then I hear it, surround yourself with experts that can challenge you so that you're not so stubborn on your vision that you're not pragmatic. And I think those are 3 powerful traits. Did you grow up in a big family or small family? Or?
Huge family. So yeah.
I thought so, yeah.
And you're hitting it down the head. It was 7 of us. And then my mom passed. It was just us. And my mom passed when I was a freshman in high school and I was the second oldest. So you know how chaotic that was. So to your point, you hit something. I think that's what drives it, right? Because we have to be able to balance between all of those and dealing with just us growing up and trying to be mature. We're being parents and we're being the mischievous brothers and sisters.
Yes, at the same time.
We're raising them and also causing the chaos. So it was one of those things. Like
you're helping brother with math homework and giving him a wedgie an hour later.
Yeah, at the same time, right? Or throwing him out the window or trying to flush his head down the toilet. That really happened. Or locking my other sister in a closet. All those things that happen. I think, I guess it does tie some up bringing. It's funny you brought that up, but you have to be able to measure across because nobody's perfect in everything. And I learned to recognize real early is, Chris, where do you have gaps? And most people will look at the gaps and say, all right, this is where he's lacking at. He can't be successful because of this. I look at it like, I'm glad I know where my gaps are. I can feel somebody to feel it. And what I'm strong at is I'm a storyteller, right? I understand the tech. And I'm not even a tech guy by the nature of building and coding. I'm an integrator, right? I'm more of an integrator. I understand where the problems are and like, how do we integrate already existing tools and make them useful? Now we have to build our own. We're patent pending now, which is super exciting that we have working now. But I looked at just integrating technologies, right? And then build where we have to build. What's existing, then build what you have to build. Because you're building something that already exists, that's already out there, and you're trying to combat that. It just makes things so much harder. We're looking at now, and we went on the outside, we built something that will go straight to the patient, directly to the patient, right? And they have just as much information or more than probably a doctor to go on to see, right? And that was our focus. There wasn't a lot of money in it initially, right, in that gate. But now where we're headed now, we went to where the value was. And I think now that we've done that, and it took us some time, and we kept our eye on the prize, I think we're in a really unique position now to be a catalyst for patient record sharing, patient control records without many barriers, right? We don't have many barriers because it's from the patient side of it that the patient can make those decisions now. There's barriers, there's not only barriers there, but because the patient is driving it, there's very limited barriers that we have right now.
So if I wanted to get your app, is it available in the App Store, or or you have a limited release going on?
Yeah, we have a limited beta release out now. I will work with a large, can't say a large academy right now, a couple of them that we'll work with now to roll out. We'll probably push out the mobile app. We're looking at the middle of March to get that out, but there is a web app that's available that you can download and you can get your records to now. We haven't rolled it out to the masses, but we do have, you can check our website, get on the list to get added to it. But one thing about MatchRite that's important is that we want to meet the patients where they are and be able to support them. We can handle 1 million patients. We have the veterans. We can put all the veterans on there if needed, but how do you support that? How do you explain to them what that is? So we really want to be engaged with that patient, not just painted with a broad brush, but we're going in. We have a whole team that's a patient engagement team. We have a stakeholder engagement team, and we have our tech team, our sales team. But all 4 of those teams work in their own 4 entities to really make this thing successful. So our stakeholder engagement goes into an area, and we're focused on a certain area. If it's through a hospital that we're working with, academy that we're working with right now, to get their patients on it, and then we can grow from there. So we are looking at spreading that, making it fully open to the public in March. But right now, it's certain subsets we're connected with now. That's why we have a good idea of what we have.
That's excellent. So as you look out at healthcare in the next 10 years, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for growth or the biggest threat to the healthcare system?
The biggest threat to the healthcare system, I think, is bureaucracy. I think that's the biggest hindrance, I think, to the healthcare system is where it stands. Because if you think from an EHR perspective, from their level, they're really focused on controlling their asset, and their asset is data, right? But then on the government side of it, they're pushing, we need to share more data. So they're on 2 opposite sides of the spectrum. So there's regulations being pushed out, asking these large companies to integrate their data. And when they're doing it in a limited fashion, which is not really that much beneficial for the patient. It'll solve some of the needs. And for us, that's what we focus on our side. The biggest opportunity now is the ability to allow the patient to have more control. In 2012, they rolled out this regulations to have more electronic medical records. So everybody created portals, right? As great as that was, everybody had a portal. How many patients trying to get 20 portals connected to get one set of information? The great thing that's happening now is that there's regulations out that says not only does a patient have right to get their information, they should have right to control it. And that started to involve the technology side of it. And said the patient can decide where they want their records to be fed into, who they connect to. They should have that right. And that changed just recently, which gave just the healthcare the biggest boost. Because if I look at it, and this is how I explain it to our group and our team, is that we're like the social media part of healthcare, right? We're like the Facebook, like we go straight to the patient, right to the source, and they can pull information on socially and connect where they need to connect it to. Yes, there's a lot of information that they'll have, probably more than what their doctor have. But here's the thing, it's theirs, right? And they're the ones that should have it. So everybody has essentially their own HIE, so to speak, individual HIE.
First of all, I'll mention that I'm going to put your link I'll get the link so people can sign up to put it in the show notes because I think it's important. So if I had your app and I went to my doctor and said, I have this, and it's a doctor here in Pittsburgh, would they have the capability to read it, or would their organization would need to make some sort of connection into yours to get it to tie?
Yeah. So what they would have to do is they would have to sign up for a SaaS model. So the patient is free to have it, but we have a SaaS model that sits inside the provider's office now, so where they can connect and read the patient's records. So within our platform, you can go as a patient, go in there at your house, at your records, and then you go into our platform where it says share. Yeah. When you hit share, there's a list of doctors or we have 2 subsets of groups you can share with. There's doctors and there's organizations. Even if a school signs up on the other side and say, I want shot records, they can share it there. We have a list of both sides where it's not just doctors or providers. You can share directly with the organizations. We're not limited to just a healthcare space. Anybody that needs those records, that need access to the records, if they want to be on the other side of that, to be a partner with us to share, they receive patient information, the patient will be able to share with them. And they can share anything from clinical notes, their own personal notes on those records that they see. We're building that out. And that's what makes this thing so unique of how we're rolling this product out, is that we understand the needs of where patients are. We don't want to just give them too much information that they can't use, but we want to make it useful for them. And that goes back to why our rollout is the way it is. Really understand what the needs are, how to refine this, because it's easier to control a subset of this. Our biggest than having a broad brush and having to go back and making adjustments on it. So our goal now is, and I will say, we're getting really good feedback on where this thing is. We're being asked for more on that point. We're still trying to keep it confined in some sense, but we're in the process now is writing out a roadmap of where this is to get to where our point earlier when we were talking about AI tools. So we're like, all right, here's how you can run AI on top of what we have now. Those are thought process our team is now is where we are now, where as is to be where we're headed to be at.
I can see the value in the educational system too. Different universities have different size medical, but the bigger universities a lot of times will take care of some of the basic student needs actually at the university.
Yeah.
And given that they're coming from all over the world, it would be a tremendous asset to have that type of
We're in
system.
conversations right now with 3 universities right now, because for that exact reason. And one of the universities we're working with now, 70% of their patients come outside. They would need to have that. And you start to understand it, especially when you start working with these university sites, you start to understand that scale, right? The need at scale. Students that's coming in and don't necessarily have an acute issue. They just need records moved, right? So it really focused directly on records, right? The VA is a really good one too, because veterans don't have digital medical records anywhere, but we can get those for them and they travel the same way. And what's so great about it is that a veteran can be a student and have student records and VA records. It all operates the same within our app. It's no section off of that too.
That's fantastic. Very good. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I appreciate the opportunity, really, and just we are really trying to change healthcare at the core of where healthcare needs to be changed, and that's with the patient. I think they're the one entity that travels, that's a part of everything that's in that record. They're one entity that's a part of every decision that's made. And they should have somewhat control. And I'm excited about where things are headed. Excited about the opportunity in healthcare alone, right? I think just for the way healthcare is opening up and allowing third-party applications like us to come in and make an impact, not just build applications, but we can make an impact. And we're super excited about that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate our conversation.
Absolutely, James. Thanks, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning into the Chalk Talk Gym podcast. For resources, show notes, and ways to get in touch, visit us at chalktalkgym.com.